Or so of you who have shown up this morning. I appreciate that as well. When Let me just try and adjust my screen here. There we go. When Danielle and I started talking about this a few months ago, I had just taught a class at Michigan State on kind of navigating government and trying to explain to the undergrads how to get government to do things you want them to do when they don't really want to do it. And so we thought that'd be a great topic to pick up on that. And then I started to think about that, but there's a lot going on in the AAM space right now. Some controversial regulations are out. There was pushback from industry in the past week. And so I started to think about all that's going on and decided that what I want to do today is sort of talk about what's going on, maybe also provide some thoughts and stuff y'all probably already know, but some common sense thoughts about how to engage government, and let's see where they are. So let me start with some opening comments before we get into the meat of the presentation. I'm really excited about where AAM is. Oh, and before I go forward, for those of you who are hydrogen aficionados, I would this talk today is going to be more focused on AAM, but I would encourage you to strongly follow what's going on in AAM, because it's going to set the sort of the baseline and the foundation for how the FAA and other government agencies think about hydrogen as hydrogen moves forward and begins to really get before the regulators. So going back to just some kind of opening thoughts, I'm very excited about where AAM is. And I think they're going to get there. I'm actually confident that they're going to. I think that the SFAR and the SFAR, and there's probably a lot of jargon for some folks here, and my apologies for that. The SFAR is short for Special Federal Air Regulations. And that's what, when I refer to SFAR, I'm talking about and I'll show the more formal name later, the kind of the concept of operations, pilot qualifications, and powered lift regulations that are currently in front of the FAA, and which are the seminal regulations to get AAM, advanced air mobility, off the ground. So I think the SFAR has some challenges, and there's challenges for industry, but I think it will get much better as the final rules come out. And I think the real thing that I believe, and I've seen this from my time at Lilium and following the industry, is the FAA is transforming for the better. They certainly have their challenges, and we'll talk about some of those, but they're getting there. There's a focus on AAM that, in my experience with sort of working as a practitioner in front of the FAA, I've never seen a focus like this before. And there's new leadership coming in, and that new leadership, I think, is much different in their outlook and in their thinking. And I think they are determined to get AAM done and get it done on the timelines that everybody believes that have been spoken about. And we can talk more about that. So if we flip to the next page, just a little bit about who I am. I've spent 30 years in the aviation airline travel space. Started off at a law firm doing what else? Aviation and airline law. Then after 9/11, spent 2 years standing up the TSA, probably the greatest professional thing I'll ever do, helping to kickstart a new government agency so travel and airlines could return to a better place. I then spent 15 years as a senior executive at 2 U.S. airlines, U.S. Airways and American. And then, as mentioned in the preview, 5 years with startups, including Clear, Lilium, Landline, Pangiam, and others, sometimes as an advisor, sometimes as an employee, kind of whatever the needs of the company were that aligned with what I was up to and doing at the time. And now I've got a small advisory practice while I figure out what's next. I've got some clients in the hedge fund space, airports, and startups. And again, not surprisingly, it's a focus on the interaction of government affairs, regulatory, and commercial matters. So with that, let's jump into the more meaty part of the presentation. Next slide. Thanks. So the electric aviation revolution is coming. I know everybody on this webinar believes that. I think many of you and probably don't believe that the FAA is ready. And I don't think anyone would think you crazy if you say, I can't get the FAA I'm not sure the FAA can get their work done fast enough, right? We know members of Congress have said it. Industry is deeply concerned about it. Experts have said it. In fact, even the DOT Office of the Inspector General said it a couple of months ago in a report that they put out looking into where the FAA was on AAM. And then international regulatory bodies have arguably demonstrated they're further along than the FAA in their rulemaking process and their regulatory structure. So why are we here? Why is the FAA perceived as lagging, right? Historically, a very bloated bureaucratic process, although I would suggest as AAM becomes a focus of leadership, they are trying their best to make that less so as it relates to AAM. Leadership team in flux. We've not had a permanent FAA administrator since Captain Dickinson left some 18 months ago. And despite lots of speculation in the media, we've not had a new Biden administration nominee since Phil Washington withdrew his name several months ago. Some of the lines of business that are critical to AAM leadership are either acting or vacant. The culture, of course, is seen as rigid and not receptive to new ideas. That's something you're always going to see in a bureaucracy. That's not unique to the FAA. But I do believe as it relates to AAM and the excitement being generated around it, that they are trying their best there. But it's not just the FAA, right? Congress shares in the blame here. The technology investments and the funding is too uncertain. It's haphazard. And when you get into scenarios like we may have at the end of next month, where the government isn't funded properly, it's a continuing resolution that freezes the FAA, like it does all government agencies, at current levels, and depending on what Congress passes, could be an actual reduction in funding. And that just puts more stress and strain on the system. It requires more management resources to address it, and they become constrained in their ability to get down to business and really focus on what we all want them to focus on, which is getting AAM up in the air. And then finally, right, running the world's largest air traffic control system while regulating it, investigating incidents that may occur, and managing all of the lines of business, the FAA is just really complex and complicated. But I believe that unlike things I've seen in the past, what's different this time is the FAA, I believe, is focused and determined to get AAM off the ground on time. Next slide, please. All right. What motivates the FAA, right? It's safety. And I know that everybody on this call is motivated by safety, but I think there's a whole different way of thinking about it at the FAA, right? When they wake up in the morning, they're thinking about safety. During the day, they're thinking about safety. When they go to sleep at night, they're thinking about safety. And they've created a commercial aviation safety regime where there hasn't been a fatal passenger crash since 2009. That's something the FAA is very proud of. And they should be, right? I mean, there's something like 10,000 flights a day. And so if you do the math on all that, all of those millions of flights that have taken place with only a single fatality in commercial aviation since 2009 is an exemplary, outstanding track record. But given that they're so proud of that, it drives their thinking. And so they have a tendency to revert to sort of the lowest common denominator in safety or maybe the highest standard in safety when there's sufficient evidence to demonstrate that something less than that still maintains safety at the super high, 10 to the minus 9 level, but there can be an alternative means of compliance or a different way of getting there. But it's really important that everyone understand when you're engaging the FAA, whether you're in the hydrogen space, the AAM space, or any other business before the FAA, they're coming to it from a culture of safety that is paramount to everything they do. And I sometimes think when AAM rolls in and starts talking about performance-based decision-making, new technologies, all that's great. I've gone into the FAA and talked about all that sort of stuff in the past. I think you have to be careful that sometimes it lands a little flat because it's a lot of talk. It's new. They don't understand it. They're learning it like we all are. And you just have to be careful about that and how it's framed. And we'll talk more about that a little bit later. Next slide, please. All right. I think one of the main reasons that initially motivated the FAA to be successful, to push to be successful in AAM is because of how, frankly, poorly the drone process rolled out in the United States and is still rolling out. I was honored to be at the first drone advisory committee meeting in 2016 that was set up under Administrator Huerta when he ran the FAA. And I remember walking around the room and meeting the drone entrepreneurs, and they all told me that 6 months later, drones would be delivering pizza to my front door. And I was excited about that, right? This is great. I went home, I told my family about that at dinner that night. And every time we get a pizza delivered now to our door, my kids ask me, Dad, where's the drone? I take a fair amount of grief from my family about that. But what's amazing is 7 years later, I know the only delivery to my front door is via Amazon or Uber Eats. I'm not sure Uber Eats was around in 2016, and they've got obviously a less complicated but still complex network of delivering food to your door, but we still don't have drones. And while I think everyone can agree, and I think the FAA, if they were being honest, and I've heard them say this from time to time, admits that there were failings across the FAA. It's not just the FAA that failed, it was the entirety of the US government. Any progress that the FAA made in getting drones, up in the sky beyond visual line of sight, et cetera, was really knocked back by security, legal, privacy, and other federal and local stakeholders because there are so many issues to be sorted out. I'm sure most people on this call are aware of a lot of those issues and have been involved in them. But I think that experience, while painful for the drone industry, has been better for the AAM industry because I think the FAA fully understands that winning at AAM is an imperative, not just for the FAA to sort of redeem themselves in this, but also for the United States as a whole, right? It's really important that the new opportunities for disrupting transportation and logistics, as well as improving individual mobility and really addressing other issues such as diversity and inclusion and some of the transportation equality issues that this administration's really focused on and has been focused on, all can be assisted, and in some cases maybe even solved, if we have a robust AAM industry in the United States. I think on its own, the FAA learned from the drone issues and has been better organized, focused, and responsive to AAM. There are examples of high levels of industry engagement, senior leadership focus, and overall progress has been much faster than myself and other longtime practitioners who I've spoken to have seen. I agree, it's not perfect, and not every line of business had initially jumped in with both feet, but even there, I think it's gotten better. And so I really do believe that the FAA has learned from the drone challenges and they don't want to miss on AAM. Next slide. Did I mention the FAA cares a lot about safety? It's really important. And I was actually, I didn't do it, but I was actually going to put this slide in on every other page because I really wanted to drive that point home. We'll do it some other ways. And so as we move on to the next slide, I know there's some questions on the that I think have already popped up in the chat. If no one objects, I'll probably just hold off and we can go over those after I get through the presentation, which is only another 6 or 7 slides. So if you were to just go and read the SFAR, you might say to yourself, oh my gosh, this is really restrictive and the FAA is not doing a lot and it's not going to help us. And so I'm really super concerned about it. But if you go back and take a look at what has happened just in the first 6, 7, almost 8 months of 2023, Danielle, I see your comment. The SFAR is, you can find it in regulations.gov. It's the integration of powered lift, pilot certification and operations. I can send a link later. But if you look at what's happened in 2023 alone, the DOT and FAA have worked really hard to get ready for AAM. The FAA noise policy reviews come out. The DOT put out, thanks, Mike, has put out a DOT AAM request for information, and that just started, responses to that just started to roll in over the last few days. And what that is the DOT asking industry and other stakeholders for their views on what the industry could look like, where it's going, and how to think about it as they think about the policies and procedures they need. Um, a couple of important rulemakings and concepts of operation for the drone industry have come out. Now, not directly on point to AAM necessarily, but certainly important as we move forward with the electric revolution. I mentioned the SFAR, which is sort of the focus a little bit of today. The DOT recently released an air carrier definition final rule, which will allow eVTOLs to carry passengers and be properly regulated under the DOT economic authorities. The FAA has put out some rulemakings on safety critical information reporting and design change reporting. Again, that's not aimed at AAM, but it's going to help the AAM industry as it moves forward as well. The AAM implementation plan, which Daniela neatly summarized using ChatGPT earlier on the call, that Innovate 28 is a roadmap and a timeline and just has chock full of lots of information about how the FAA intends to get AAM there. An urban air mobility fact sheet they put out. The 2023 FAA Drone Symposium and AAM Summit took place in Baltimore about 3 weeks ago. And I think it's really significant that the FAA did this. And the reason I believe that is they did it in the middle of a rulemaking. Historically, if you were practicing in front of the FAA and they had a rulemaking going on, there was no way they would do a whole symposium or summit dedicated to the discussion around, you couldn't talk about the rule directly, perhaps, but they just wouldn't even show up. They would get invited to speak at things, and if there was a rule that was likely to come up that was relevant to the conversation at a conference, the FAA just wouldn't show up. They would just say, we can't do it. We're in the middle of a rulemaking. So to see them actually co-sponsor a summit and participate fully in that summit, I think is just terrific. And it's another indication of FAA's eagerness to be a partner to industry and to get there. And then the DOT, of course, is leading, because of some congressional legislation, a whole of government advanced air mobility committee, which has been, as I understand it, traveling around the country, going and visiting the sites of different stakeholders, asking lots of questions and trying to really understand how things are happening and how things are happening and how, again, industry sees the future and where can government be a partner to industry and getting to the future. Then some revisions of flight maintenance manuals and training, which will ultimately impact the AAM industry. And then finally, and I'm going to bring this up in a little more detail and go into a little more detail on it. The FAA put out about a month ago a proposed rule called Mosaic, and it's the modernization of the special airworthiness certification. And what that really gets to is how they're changing things for the better in the general aviation community. And I think if you were to read that and read it as a roadmap of where AAM is going to get to, because the FAA is getting there first with GA, I think it's a cause for a lot of optimism that the FAA, some of the things that AAM has been pushing, whether it's performance-based or other alternate means of compliance for safety, the FAA is showing a willingness to get there. Now, I'll be the first to say, and I said at the beginning of the talk, not everything that FAA has put out is perfect. Obviously, there are portions of rules that people don't like, that industry disagrees with. That's okay. That's natural. That's normal. That's part of the process. But I just think that this body of work thus far is impressive, and it demonstrates a real commitment by the FAA to get ready for AAM, because they know it's coming and they're going to get us there. Next slide. All right. So while there might be some questions in the AAM industry about the SFAR, Mosaic is very exciting to a lot of people in the general aviation community. It's just some highlights of what it's going to do, and it's a really long, complicated rule. I should have run it through ChatGPT, but the few things I did pull out from my own review. is it updates and streamlines the process by which aircraft are certified for flight. The definition of light sport aircraft, which is a term of art, is expanded, and even eVTOLs can fit into that category. Trade weight, historically, the government for general aviation weight limits were how they defined aircraft types. Now they're allowing some performance-based measures such as stall speeds to define what is a light sport aircraft and what is not. It revises the training for pilots and allows for simplified vehicle operations, which is basically enough. That was funny, Danielle. I can't wait to hear about that. And we'll see how well I did presenting it. Advanced avionics are being recognized for reducing pilot workloads, which is, of course, what AAM is all about. It expands commercial activity to permit certain jobs. You can't carry passengers if you're a light sport aircraft, but you can do surveillance and photography now. And other liberalization around light sport aircraft and general aviation, including some believe the ability now to provide for personal air transportation, meaning some variation of flying cars or something akin to the Jetsons. We'll see. We'll see how that ultimately turns out. Interestingly enough, the new regulations increase aircraft safety and performance. Historically, that has never been thought of as something that is, historically, that has been thought of as mutually exclusive, right? If you had a more higher performing aircraft, it was deemed to be less safe. And now the FAA is taking the view that we can improve performance and increase aircraft safety, which in their mind is a win on both counts. I really think that at Mosaic demonstrates that FAA is running towards new technology and performance-based regulations. I know for some they won't come fast enough, but there's reason for optimism. Okay, next page. Thank you. So if you look at the language that that the FAA used to introduce both the Mosaic rule and the AAM rules and the innovation document, you can see the differences, right? On the left side of the page, the rule will encourage manufacturers to make light sport aircraft operations safer, more versatile, and accessible while maintaining rigorous safety standards, right? That's what the acting FAA administrator, associate administrator for safety said in the press release the FAA put out around these Mosaic rules. Then you go and you look at, the plan shows how all the pieces will come together, allowing the industry to scale with safety as the North Star, right? That's the Deputy FAA Administrator, Katie Thompson, who's talking about the innovation document, Innovate 28 document, the roadmap, and very much focused on safety as the North Star, right? And then the SFAR was introduced by Mr. Bolter as well, and he acknowledges these rules are going to safely usher in this new era of aviation and provide the certainty the industry needs to develop. I'm not sure the industry would agree with that comment in the current state of the rulemaking, but there's lots of time and things will get fixed, and we'll go from there. And so one other term of art that the FAA likes to use is they believe in this crawl, walk, run framework for new technologies and new ideas. And so obviously you all know what crawl, walk, run means. And the challenge, of course, is where on the continuum do you land? In my mind is that the Mosaic rules show the GA is running. In the SFAR, there's an argument that AAM is only crawling, and we want to get AAM to walking as fast as we can. Run will come with time as well. And that's the challenge. But I do believe, as I've kind of made the case, FAA is on the right path. Next slide, please. Okay. When you look at the SFAR, it's important to realize that, in my mind, it is not the end state. It's a starting point. And I believe the process will work. You can see for yourself, if you were to have run, I'm confident if Danielle had run all of the commentary on the SFAR that industry poured in last week to the docket and ran it through the chat GPT, these are the issues that would bubble to the top. And I'm not here to talk about any one of them, but I do have a couple of observations on why I believe the SFAR came out the way it did. First of all, that document has been under construction for a while. And right, they started talking about the SFAR and getting a rulemaking out 14 months ago or so. I don't remember the exact time, but it was right around, it was last summer. And so they started on that process. The rulemaking was under construction, and it's a very lengthy process of lots of iterations internally, back and forth. Obviously, the lawyers play a big role in it because it's a rulemaking, but lots of other offices weigh in. And I think during that time there was a lot of change in leadership at the FAA. There was, for a time, the FAA was somewhat rudderless without a leader, as Nolan had announced his decision to step down. And while he stayed on in a caretaker capacity for a while, I just think that there was a lot of movement. People weren't sure where their job was going to be. But there were a lot of changes that were made, and some of those changes, I think, were installing the right people in the right positions to help AAM get through. My point of all that is, it was probably, in order to stick to the deadlines that the FAA followed, I think it was easier for the FAA to come out with a proposed rule that maybe people believe is too harsh or doesn't go far enough in getting AAM off the ground, and let the industry respond. And I think the industry did a terrific job of organizing themselves, both individually as companies, but also with their associations, and being completely united on their where they opposed the FAA rule as it's currently drafted, and outlining the risks and the dangers of those, of those rules being as difficult as they are, as perceived by the industry. And I think that that's really helpful, because where government lives, where regulators like to look for, are gaps between industry stakeholders, and it's in those gaps that they find space to get a rulemaking done on terms that the regulator might want, and sometimes it's easy to not be receptive to industry when industry is scattered and has lots of different views. So I think that the unification by the industry and the strong comments from a number of the associations, as well as the individual participants, I think really will bear some results in the next round when the final rule is released. Some 5, 6, 7 months from now at a minimum. So next page. Right. So if we think about the differences between Mosaic and the SFAR, in my mind, and the reason it's set off that way, it's not a typo, it's data, right? GA has been around for a really long time, obviously. There's lots of data. It's been 20 years since the last big overhaul of the general aviation rules, and the FAA has collected lots of data. When it comes to advanced air mobility, the data has come into the FAA as best as the manufacturers can do it, but there are some challenges, right? A lot of the manufacturers' aircraft are not yet their conforming production model, but test models and so forth. So while the data isn't expected to change dramatically, it will change. And in a number of other cases, the aircraft haven't even been flown with a pilot yet. And that's not a criticism, obviously. It takes time, and industry wants to be safe, but there's a lot that has to be done. And the FAA, at the end of the day, is somewhat of a data-driven organization. And so it's really important to get the data in there. And that's going to be maybe a challenge for the industry, but I think that they're finding ways to generate lots of data as fast as they can and get it to the FAA. And I think they'll continue to do so. And I think that will continue to help the case for accelerating AAM's introduction. Experience, obviously, AAM's new, GA's been around. Comfort and familiarity. I was on dozens of calls with regulators, and it's clear they're still learning AAM as the industry is still nascent. And they're not always comfortable with it, right? If you've been at the FAA as a staffer for 25 years, and all you know is fixed wing aircraft that burn carbon, and now you have people coming in showing you aircraft that may or may not be fixed wing and don't burn carbon but use batteries, you've got to get your head around that. And it doesn't come on the first meeting, right? It's going to take lots of meetings. And unfortunately, and this isn't FAA specific, and you've all experienced this when dealing with government, whether you're getting a driver's license or trying to convince the government to approve a merger. It's easier to say no than get to yes. No one ever got fired in government for saying no, but sometimes people do get in trouble for saying yes. So you've got to overcome that. And then there's risk, right? I think there's a view that if there's an incident around AAM, the first incident is going to be owned by the entire industry. And while that's true, the organization that's really going to own an incident is going to be the FAA, because they're the ones who are going to have to explain it to Congress, to the administration, and to the American people. And so, nobody wants to be in that situation. And they're going to get, I think FAA is going to get there, but they've got to be worried about all these things and think about it. And it's not to suggest industry doesn't think about it, but I think at FAA, it's a bit more ingrained, and industry is getting there, but I think they've got maybe some room to go on that. But despite all the conservative default positions that they took in the SFAR, they being the FAA, in their Advanced Air Mobility Implementation Plan, the efforts are currently oriented around piloted operations, as in the interim, the agency expects to use waivers, deviations, and exemptions as appropriate for initial operations. I absolutely think that everybody who's involved in AAM should look at statements like that as proof and a cause for optimism, right? So what I've noticed in my time in being a practitioner in front of DOT and FAA and other government agencies is that very frequently there's a foundational rule that's created. It might be a very harsh rule. It might seem unassailable. But then when people have a demonstrated need for an exception or a waiver or some alternative means of compliance, whatever it is, government agencies, including the FAA, have a lot of ability to get you there. You can't necessarily do it in every situation, and nor are they going to do it in every situation. But people need to think of the SFAR as the foundation, and there's going to be a whole body of advanced air mobility law that grows up around it, rules and regulations, where there are going to be waivers and there's going to be exemptions. And as companies go through their process of getting their aircraft certified or getting their pilot training programs approved or getting their production facilities approved, there's going to be lots of opportunity to seek waivers, to seek other means of compliance, and to seek deviations from what could come out in some instances as a very challenging rule for industry. Again, it's not all going to be perfect, and you're not going to get everything you want. But I still believe, based on what I've seen and the way the FAA is working, that we'll get there. The other reason for hope is if FAA is to take Innovate 28 seriously, and just for those of you who aren't that familiar with it, its main focus is that the industry is up and really operating at scale in time for the LA Olympics in 28, right? So that's a hard deadline. The Olympics aren't going to move if AAM isn't done. So I think that for the FAA to get to Innovate 28, the current SFAR is not the current SFAR is, and I agree with industry on this, too prescriptive and too difficult to comply with. So I really do believe that FAA is going to work really hard to find ways to get to yes. The rule may be X, but there'll be changes, there'll be opportunities to move on. And I think the rule, when it's finally drafted, will be better, more industry friendly than perhaps the perception is now. Let's move on to the next page. All right. This is kind of the practitioner in me. As I read through, and I didn't read every comment written in the every comment that was filed in the SFAR docket, but one big difference, right? At the FAA, safety is a noun. I found that when I read a lot of the commentary from industry and some of the association, they took safety. I don't want to say they took it for granted, because no one takes safety for granted, but they didn't spend enough time laying a foundation about safety in their comments. And when the FAA talks about safety, they use it as a noun. it felt like when industry spoke about safety, they used it as an adjective or an adverb. And obviously sometimes it's saying the same thing, but other times it felt like industry missed the mark on it. And there was at least one commentator who actually suggested that if the industry didn't go, I'm sorry, if the FAA didn't approve their proposal, that would make things unsafe. I don't know if that's something that I might have, I don't know if I would have said it that way. But then I looked at ALPA's comments. And for those of you who don't know, ALPA is the Airline Pilots Association, which is the largest aviation union in the US, taking care of pilots. I think the pilots at all the large US carriers, except for American, are members of ALPA. And the language that they use, which I've clipped to the document, right? This would be a significant degradation of safety to allow a pilot in training to operate an aircraft in the NAS without prior flight instruction, and that specific powered lift aircraft from an instructor having the ability to take control of the powered lift aircraft, right? Just if you're a regulator reading that, it speaks to you probably. This would be a significant degradation of safety, right? They're talking about safety, ALPA, in the same way the FAA, I believe, thinks about it. Now, I'm not saying I agree with ALPA's position. I'm not even saying it's a correct position, but I just think it's something that industry, and it's a new industry, they've got to learn this, right? It has to learn how to talk to the FAA. And as I said, for the most part, it was good. And Mike, I know ALPA was an anomaly, but in the Biden administration, given its focus on labor, ALPA should not be taken lightly. Anyway, I pointed out as just a commentary on sort of language and how language matters and FAA safety. In my mind, to the FAA, safety is a noun. Next slide. All right. So how should we think about the future? I really do think industry is got to recognize where FAA is. They want to get you there. They really do. I really believe that, but they're not going to cut corners. And so, slick ideas that cut corners, probably non-starters. I think looking for opportunities to drive the data is awesome. I love what Joby and now Archer and others are doing with the military. Those contracts are real. Those contracts provide lots of opportunity to get the aircraft up and get them tested in real conditions, outside of the wind tunnels and off the computer screens. And I think it's a terrific opportunity. And while the military is not going to call the FAA up and say, hey, you should approve this for commercial, that's not their role. Having the military vouch for the performance of the aircraft is going to go a long way towards getting the FAA comfortable around things. So I think that's terrific. And then offshore, right? I think one of the most brilliant examples of that we saw in the drone industry were Zipline, right? They couldn't fly what they wanted to fly in the United States. So they went to Rwanda and started making medical, and other parts of Africa, and started making medical deliveries, delivering medicine to remote villages and towns and places with no roads and limited infrastructure. And now Zipline has one of the best, has one of the deepest data pools of successful drone deliveries. And as opportunities present themselves in the US, they're in a great position to expand and grow upon that. And there may be others in the drone industry. I singled out Zipline because I'm familiar with it, but if there are others, kudos for that as well. Look, the FAA is obviously having to balance all stakeholders. Rulemaking lay the foundation, but as we know, FAA has talked about the deadlines. They know what the deadlines are. They've telegraphed, I think, how they're going to get you there. Take FAA at their word. They're determined to get this right. Yeah, they're going to over-index to safety, but I think today, unlike things I've seen in the past at the FAA, it is not a closed-minded approach. They are still learning like industry. Persistence, presence, and persuasion, right? I talked about the FAA employee who, has been doing fixed-wing aircraft with carbon for 25, 30 years, and now is being presented with a whole new type of vehicle that doesn't use carbon but uses batteries, right? One meeting isn't going to persuade that person. You're going to probably have to do multiple meetings and spend lots of time. And of course, it never hurts to remember that it is all about safety. And with that, one last slide, and then I'll be happy to take questions and go from there. Look, the FAA has a lot of work to do. Industry has a lot of work to do. I really believe the new leadership wants to make AAM successful. I think Polly Trackberg, Katie Thompson, I don't know who's going to be the next administration's appointee, but hopefully it's somebody. Hopefully the administration has heard industry on that and is going to get somebody who's excited about AAM. I think the FAA is focused and they are working hard. As I've said repeatedly, I think the SBAR and individual certification processes will help a lot. I think industry will get a lot of what it wants as it moves forward. It won't get everything, but they'll get there. And also, a lot of people have think about the traditional regulator-regulated adversarial relationship, which is kind of a model of how things get done. It may not be the right way. Like, I actually thought that the summit, which I did not attend, but I know a lot of people on this call probably did, is the right way to get AAM done. I think it's the only way to get AAM done, frankly. And look, I would just end with, it's going to be a bumpy ride, but AAM is going to get lift off, and I still believe it's going to get lift off on time, and that the deadlines that the FAA has talked about will be met. Thanks, everyone, for listening, and I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you so much, Howard, for that fantastic presentation. I learned a lot. So usually at this time in the webinar, we will allow people to turn on their camera and unmute and ask your question directly to Howard. Mike, I see you first, so I'll let you go. And then after you, let's let Peter Connors go. I saw he had a question in the chat pretty early on.
Yeah, can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Great. Hey, Howard, I was just adding some running commentary there. I didn't disagree with a single thing you said. It was a fantastic job. And I just wanted to say, thanks from someone who's been, eating and drinking this SFAR business for the last, 2 or 3 weeks solid. You did a very good summary of everything and the key issues there. So thanks a lot.
Thanks, Mike. Appreciate that from you. Really do.
Thanks, Mike. Good to see you here. Also, for those of you that don't know, High Sky Society is a spinoff of Vertical Flight Society. So without Mike Hirschberg, many of us would not be here. So thank you to all of the amazing contributions that you've done for the entire industry. Peter, would you like to unmute and ask?
Sure, Danielle. Nice presentation, Howard. Thank you very much for joining the group. Just last night, I was just searching the internet and I came across Jetsons, which it just kind of just really was, blew me off my chair. How about that? It's a $100,000 personal aircraft, and it's not for everybody. You have to weigh less than 210 pounds, so that's like, does not include most of the American male population. But I was just kind of just amazed to see this thing fly, right? It was just, there's a video, right? And the one thing that was interesting is that the blades are exposed, and the speaker noted, it could really do some damage if somebody got in the way of the blades. And then the speaker commented that it was not regulated. And I just wonder if you could kind of unpack those two statements.
I was not familiar with the Jetson other than as a TV show, and that we're all we all fondly remember from our youth. It's a part. Okay, Mike's got it. It's an ultralight. I gotta confess, I just don't know the ultralight rules and regulations. Mike, if you know them, let's make this a community learning event and jump in.
Sure. So, and I'm speaking off the top of my head, so hopefully this is all accurate. But hang gliders and power gliders are considered under this ultralight category, and they're not considered to be aircraft. They're not certified. And the idea is that, if you're going to take the risk as a pilot and get into a hang glider or whatever, then that's all on you. and then it's up to a total weight of 254 pounds, unless you got floats one in. I think you get 30 pounds per float. So there's a number of aircraft like this. There's Opener Blackfly, there's the Jetson Arrow, various different types of small ultralight aircraft. There's some controversy because the owner pilot, is expected to be able to inspect the aircraft. Now, people say, well, if it's fly-by-wire, then how can you inspect the aircraft? That's all those, hundreds of thousands of software lines of code. So it's a little bit controversial, but Opener just a few weeks ago, announced that they had delivered their aircraft to their first customer. So this again is also a single seat, also has smaller exposed propellers. But anyway, so it is, the FAA has been going along with it, I think. Another one that's well known is a company called Lift, L-I-F-T, or L-I-F-T, Lift.aero, and they have their hexacopter. Lift Aircraft, but it's not a Y. I think it's Lift Aircraft. Yeah, you have to Google it. But anyway, the point is, yeah. Oh, look, there's our website. If you're under the 254 pounds, now they've got, like, this is an earlier version here. They have now 6 floats. You get 30 pounds a piece. I think the same thing with Opener Blackfly. So it actually comes out to be like 400 pounds with for the passenger. So anyway, the point is, 450 pounds. There's this, I'll say, a loophole or an exception for these ultralight aircraft, and there are quite a number of them, and they're really exciting. But you have to make they're not certified, so you have to make the decision if you want to, risk your life in it.
It's so interesting that we're talking about this topic, because literally right before this webinar, we had all of these companies pulled up for another reason. We were researching this topic, and the question that we were trying to answer, and maybe this is totally a tangent, but obviously you can make this a commercial business, right? Or they wouldn't be doing it. But do you know what the limitations or regulations are around that?
Yeah, you cannot operate them. It has to be the owner pilot that's in it. You can't operate it for money. I mean, you can't do it for revenue, which is a big problem with these companies. We haven't figured out how to get around with that. Now, I don't know can you see this?
Yep.
I was a super early bird. I put down $250, I think 4 or 5 years ago, when they were going to come to Baltimore and fly. And I'm pilot 054, super early bird. I'm still waiting.
Yeah, you got your ticket. That's great. That's great.
So, like I said, there's a bit of controversy that's not clear. Yeah. So there's a whole bunch of things. They're basically flying, flying Sea-Doos or
well, it reminds me of this YouTube
skis.
video that I have to pull up now, because there's actually a flying bathtub, and that's what they remind me of.
Yeah, the flying bathtub's great. If you read the German at the end, it says that it was not a full flight. I mean,
Oh, really?
They kind of faked it, but
okay.
It is pretty exciting.
So yeah.
It's kind of it's a loophole then, Mike. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, correct. They wouldn't really call it a loophole, but that's basically what it is. Now, so the thing about Mosaic then, okay, so Mosaic, the aircraft will still not be certified, but you can fly now. It allows 2 seats up to
4 seats.
Up to 4 seats. If you only have a light sport aircraft pilot's license, then you can only fly yourself and a passenger. But if you have a regular pilot's license, a regular commercial pilot's license, then you could fly a Mosaic aircraft with up to 4 passengers in it. So Mosaic, I'll just say one more thing about the SFAR. Mosaic kind of did all the right things to make better, safer aircraft. And because before it excluded rotorcraft, it excluded electric aircraft. So the Pipistrel Velis is, you know, the Western world's first certified electric airplane. It's a two-seater. People want to use it for pilot training, but there were no rules for it in the U.S. So now they have the Mosaic rules, the proposed rules for the light sport aircraft. Whereas the SFAR, it's sort of a Frankenstein document where I think everybody in the FAA, without strong leadership, basically got to throw their own hard requirements in there without thinking about, you know, how can we do something that's safer or equivalent level of safety in a more flexible way. And you know, basically it's over regulated, over specified a lot of the, you know, requirements without thinking of how could we do this smarter and better and safer, in my opinion.
It's a very interesting spin on the concept of an air taxi, right? You know, if you could get 2-3 people, you know, make this a little more user friendly, you could see how it would become the air taxi of the future. So, you know, just the one thing that did bother me was you see the propellers there; they look really dangerous. You know, do drones have open propellers? What's going on?
Well, I mean, every model is different. In the eVTOL space, I believe all the models I've seen are either closed or they're so far out of, like you can't walk into it, right? Yeah, there's a good picture, right? A lot of those are covered or they're up high enough that you're not going to have an issue, right. Or you're just going to be just like, you know, there are aircraft that still have propellers that aren't protected. People, you know, there'll be safety precautions.
Oh. Yeah, I mean, notably EHang, and there have been other aircraft that have had low propellers like that. And I guess I'll just say one thing is, I mean, it's not something I prefer personally. This is my personal opinion, not something I would personally be a big fan of. But a difference is between a turbine-powered or piston-powered aircraft and an electric one is when it's on the ground, the blades aren't spinning. Like there's no reason, like the engine's not running when it's on the ground. So there's no reason to have the blades spinning except when you're about to take off. So you get in the aircraft, you know, you do all your checks, you're ready to take off, you make sure everything's clear and you hit the button and you take off. So it is a little bit different than a conventional helicopter or airplane.
Yeah, lots of debate around that topic, Peter. A very interesting question indeed. I think I saw next in the chat was Samant and Samant. I hope I'm saying your name right. You asked the question directly to me, but if you're still on, you are more than welcome to ask it to Howard, or I can read it.
I can. Yeah, thanks very much for the opportunity. Can you hear me okay, Danielle?
Yep.
Okay, Howard, a question, if just at a very high level, when you have to summarize the whole hydrogen aspect in the aircraft industry, FAA versus the governance of other organizations who are not really familiar with aircraft, they're probably more, you know, familiar with ground transportation pieces. Very high level, summarize where does hydrogen fit in and how much of the regulation is governed by FAA?
So, well, if you're using hydrogen as a power source on an aircraft, that's going to be governed by the FAA, right? Because you're making a big change to the aircraft, and obviously propulsion is important. There will be other stakeholders in federal, state, and local governments, right, dealing with hydrogen as it relates to location, facilities, safety, procedures, right, all those sorts of things. So I think you know all that. So help me with your question. What exactly?
What is the status of that whole governance piece? Is that in a completion stage? Is it completed? Is it just in the beginning stages?
I mean, there's a bunch more people on this call who are hydrogen experts who know far more about hydrogen than I do. But my sense, and Daniela, this is probably where you could help us educate everyone, is we're in the early days.
Very early days. I think, you know, the best thing that I've seen this year is that the word hydrogen is being included in these documents and regulation, but that's about as far as I've seen it go. So very, very early. In fact, the FAA, I don't know if anybody from the FAA is on this call, maybe could speak to that. I did see a few people from the FAA registered for this webinar. I don't remember the names. So if I did, I'd call on them directly. But if anybody's on here that could maybe speak to that, and this might help. I've personally been trying to get a couple of folks from the FAA to speak on this webinar for about 18 months. So keep looking for that. Hopefully, maybe that's how we'll kick off January 2024 with the FAA. But, you know, I think they're learning a lot. They are active. They participate in these webinars monthly. But as they haven't really come out publicly and made a stand on hydrogen, but again, the language is being included. So that's a big deal, that they're not just, you know, ignoring it. They're definitely taking it seriously. But I can't hand you like a book of rules yet, unfortunately. I'll be really excited when that happens.
If I may, this is Frank Kaiser from the Netherlands.
Hi, Frank.
Can you hear me? Hi. Hi, thanks for the presentation. I'm on the fringe involved in some of the EuroK activities on hydrogen standardization, storage and distribution and fuel cells. And I think it's in the very early days. I would only agree with that. It's still, we're trying to find out who's who, what's the best way forward. Still a lot of experimentation needs to be done, I think. So early days is, I can confirm from the fringe of being active in EuroK. And I think SAE is in the same vein at the moment.
Yeah, and something that I do when any new document is published, the first thing I do is just do a search, see how many times hydrogen is mentioned. And, you know, so it's mentioned 3 times in this document. Previously, it wouldn't have been mentioned. In some of the old AAM stuff, it was strictly battery. So for me, this is exciting because they're including hydrogen, but it's just very broad. So yeah, at least it's in there. And we'll get the FAA to talk one of these days. We'll get them. I know somebody in here is listening.
Maybe one more comment. I understood from an acquaintance that EASA will submit a special condition by the end of this year, a draft on hydrogen.
Nice. Oh,
so
that's exciting
to see.
Very exciting. And, you know, I've been really studying a lot about like why Europe is further along than the US in hydrogen. And that really comes down to the US having more, you know, being more independent with energy. And so, you know, I used to be one of these people that would criticize the US like, oh, we're moving too slow. And I do think that, but also we sort of have an advantage to look what Europe is doing and learns that it won't take us as long. Europe is going really quickly on hydrogen. That's exciting. And so we kind of have this opportunity to learn from EASA and hopefully adapt some of the changes that are being made there. And actually somebody else made a comment in the chat. I'm trying to find it on EASA. Let's see. Suzanne, are you in here? Would you like to come on and ask your question? I feel like it's relevant if you're still here.
No, she sent a message. She's left already. But
oh, okay. She asked, do you have any comments on how EASA has advanced on eVTOLs?
Yeah, so they've been, well, it depends on who you talk to, but there's a view that they are further along than the FAA on that. I don't know if that's accurate or not. I don't know that it's inaccurate. I think there's still a lot of work to be done there. They've just approached it differently. But what I would say is the one difference, in my opinion, between EASA and the FAA is EASA seems to have leaned in more on the technology advancements. They better recognize the technology. Maybe better recognize isn't fair, but they're more willing to embrace it right now. And I think, you know, sort of what I said about Mosaic and then what Mike said in the last couple of minutes about Mosaic is, you know, Mosaic is the FAA leaning forward and embracing technology and advanced avionics and fly-by-wire and a lot of things as it moves down from commercial aviation to GA. It feels like EASA is willing to start there with eVTOL, whereas the FAA wants to get there. And so I think in that regard, EASA may be further along, but they're still going to have a lot of work to do to get it up in the air in Europe as well.
Yeah, and to that point, I think the reason why that EASA is perceived as being farther, at least for me, is because they published a few years ago like the eVTOL requirements document, and it was just really simple, like 1 or 2 pages, and that it really hit the industry hard, though. That was really impressive. A lot of us were excited, like, oh, they've embraced eVTOLs and AAM. So I don't know, maybe the FAA could publish just a short document to let us know that they're with us. We know that they are.
I think they probably believe they have.
Yeah. Well, I guess a short version, that this document is good. It does that well. It's only 40 pages. So it's a lot easier to read than some of the other stuff.
That is a short document, Danielle.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Some of the other stuff I stuck into ChatGPT was like, gosh, thousands of pages, which, by the way, I put your presentation into ChatGPT, not to critique it, but I asked it, what does Howard mean by the difference of Mosaic and I think you were comparing Mosaic and SFAR? Yeah. And it gave me a pretty good answer, and it explained it to me and what the ALPA was and what SFAR was and what Mosaic. So I was just asking like what some of the acronyms were, and it knew. So that was cool.
Did I get it right?
Yeah. Well, I didn't ask if you got it right or wrong. I just asked, what does he mean? And then I also gave it this document and some other stuff from the FAA so that it had like some resources. So I wasn't asking if you got it right or wrong. Maybe I should, and
okay.
I'll let you know. But it did do a nice summary of it. I'll share it with you.
Okay.
Mike Kramer, are you on the call? I see your question. And this probably will
Hey, Danielle and Howard.
Hi. Good to see you.
Hi, Mike.
Hey, Howard. Hey, quick question. In regards to ELOS, equivalent level of safety, when you do new technology, you have any strategies on working the FAA for that? Square peg, round hole problem, right?
Yeah, I mean, look, data is obviously really important because if you're trying to show that if the safety level of a particular process is 10 to the -9 or 10 to the -6, you got to be able to demonstrate that you're getting there, right? Because the first word is equivalent. So I think that's really important. It can't just be tell me, it's got to be show me.
And maybe you could just quickly summarize what Mike, did you have more? Go ahead. You can keep talking.
No, it's pretty good. I mean, it's a tough problem when you're trying to compare apples to oranges, and you can't say it's safer because what does that mean per se? It's sort of the problems. The failure mode in an electric motor has absolutely nothing to do with the failure mode in a gas turbine or piston, for example.
Yeah, I hear you. I think you just have to work through it, and it's the data and it's the testing and it's how many cycles. It's all of those issues, right? I mean, that's where the eVTOLs are trying really hard to get there, and we talked about some of the strategies. I mean, if you've got a way to pilot your or proof of concept your idea with the military, offshore, wherever else you can generate that data and those cycles and all that, that's gonna be that's what the FAA wants, right? They're getting better at accepting computer simulations, but I think computer simulations get you. I think they get you in the door and you're credible. They don't get you to yes, in my mind.
Yeah, digital twin and a really be honest with yourself, Iron Bird. That's what we're looking at.
Okay.
And maybe Howard, could you for the non-aviation, I guess for people that are new in the aviation space, could you just quickly, like in like a sentence or two, explain what we mean by 10 to the -7 and 10 to the -9?
Yeah, so 10, it's a safety standard that the likelihood of something going wrong, the probability of it occurring is 10 to the -9. I'm not a math major, so I just know that's a really big number, and as close to infinity as you can probably get. But that's basically what it means.
10 to the -9 means 1 in a billion.
Yeah, I didn't. Thank you. Yeah, I didn't want it in scientific notation, but it's basically 0.1000000.
with 9 zeros.
Yeah,
I don't know if
I
I've
went.
done
I went to law school, so I never had to have a conversation like this.
Yeah. So Rashab is also a doctor there.
Yeah.
But yeah, so in EASA, so that's airliner safety, right? So if you're in a helicopter, it's like 10 to the minus seventh, maybe six.
Yeah, I think it's 6.
6, yeah. And FAA tries to get to 7. But that's only looking really at like mechanical complexity and mechanical failures. So like I'll say the US based AM industry, eVTOL industry really looks more at the holistic safety, not just the mechanical safety. Like if the reason why EASA went that way is because Volocopter had 18 propellers and Lilium had 36 at the time, now 30 fans. So they had massive redundancy of mechanical systems or electric systems in this case. So they could lose several of those and not be a problem. But it tends to drive, a lot more redundancy and complexity. So kind of the US industry has said, no, you can do this with six propellers. You just have to look at the whole system, not just the mechanical failure, but pilot failure, maintenance and things like that. So there's a difference of opinion or a difference of perspective, but the end result still is to get to kind of approaching airliner safety in general, where, like you said, in 15, 14 years, no one's been killed in a airline crash, I'll say, or accident. So that's really the goal, because even though these are only 4-seat, 5-seat aircraft, if they're eventually operating, millions of flights a year, then there's still a lot of exposure. But that was one of the things with the SFAR. The SFAR is supposed to allow initial operations, but if they laden it with too many of these future requirements, then the aircraft will never get a chance to prove how safe they can be or how safe they are.
Yeah, actually, Mike makes a really good point that I didn't include in the talk, but it's something I've been talking about when I talk to the FAA. There's a lot of people in the FAA who are worried about 2035, 2040, and beyond, when for the manufacturers, it's 2020. Let's just be honest, it's 2025, maybe a certification in 2024. And I think this is really important because there's this perception by regulators, not just at the FAA, that somebody's going to flip a switch one day and we're going to wake up and the skies are going to be darkened with eVTOLs flying, everywhere. And the reality is there is no way possible for it to be anything more than incremental for at least a number of years, if for no other reason the production facilities won't be in place to build at scale. And so, for a lot of Americans, just keeping it here in the US, but you could make the same argument in Europe, there'll be limited routes, maybe, connecting a big city heliport, because vertiports won't be built initially, to something near an airport, or maybe a few other routes here and there. But it's just not going to be, we flip a switch and this industry goes live. And so a lot of the issues that worry the FAA or EASA long term, there's time to work out. They don't have to be solved on day one, but they also shouldn't be a bar to getting to day one. And that's something that I think you can't say to the regulators enough, because every time you say it, they say, yeah, we agree. And then something comes out, as Mike points out, the SFAR, there's stuff in the SFAR that I agree with. It's contemplating what life's going to look like in 10 years, not in 3 years.
And we know that the FAA takes, used to be decades, but years to make rule changes. So we understand that. But if the eVTOL industry had never said, hey, we want to have 10,000 flights a day in cities, right? If they had just said, yeah, we're going to try these and see how they work, the FAA would have had a very different approach. I remember in the Uber Elevate days, they said, we're going to fly like 1 million hours with a pilot, and then we think we'll be able to prove that the pilots can fly themselves, and you don't need you don't need to have a pilot there. And that's really what the FAA is looking for. They're looking for data. EASA tends to take a more theoretical approach. EASA wants to look at the data. But if you burden it so much that you can't get the data, you'll never reach the ultimate objective of having well, you'll never get there if you don't start.
Of course. So, Mike, I agree with you. But if the industry didn't say they wanted 10,000 flights a day, there wouldn't be an industry because there'd be no investors. So
Exactly
that's
right.
the flip
No,
side.
absolutely.
Right?
Yes, it's
Damned if you do, damned if you don't.
absolutely.
Well, we've got 2 minutes left, so I think that'll be the end of our Q&A session for today. Thank you all so much for participating. Thank you so much, Howard, for this amazing presentation and contribution to the industry and to High Sky Society. Thanks, Mike, for Vertical Flight Society's contributions today. It's been fun, as always. And don't forget to get your tickets for Flying High. Mike is one of our keynotes. He'll actually be kicking off the event, so we're really excited about that. And we're just going to go nuts with hydrogen aviation. Lots of exciting news at that event. So go to highsky.org, click Flying High, and everything you need will be there. You can get your tickets, book your room, get the agenda, everything. So with that, everybody have an amazing week, and I'll see you next month. Thanks. That couldn't have gone any better.